Hi, y'all, and welcome to the live stream tonight. We have some amazing, very good new details about Alec Murdaugh and his financial crimes. Is he about to give up? The feds have filed a new indictment against him that has lots of new information for us about some of the crimes he committed, allegedly, financially. He hasn't been found guilty of those yet. And we got great detail, which I'm going to unpack for you. It's all right in my wheelhouse where I know exactly what the issues are and why what he did was so seriously against the principles laid down by the bar and by the law. Today, he has been arraigned and pled not guilty. But his attorney, Jim Griffin, is suggesting that's about to change, that he may be going to plead guilty to these issues very soon. So we're going to see what they are. We're going to start with why the feds are after Murdaugh. What is it that they want from Alec Murdaugh? We know, of course, that Alec Murdaugh has already been convicted of murdering his wife and his son, but he hasn't been convicted yet of the financial crimes. And the feds filed a slew of them, 22 different charges against him with lots of detail about what he supposedly has done. That he entered his plea today. The charges were filed just 1 week ago, and he entered his plea today. So we're going to talk about his plea and how likely it is that he's going to change that to a not guilty. And then we're going to talk about what that means for the murder case. Is it going to change anything with the conviction that's presently going to be on appeal for Alec Murdaugh being convicted of murdering his wife and son? So we'll be talking about all of that. And let's start at the top with what are the charges against Alec Murdaugh. And in general, the concept behind the federal indictment is that Alec Murdaugh was blatantly stealing client money, along with Russell Laffitte, the CEO of Palmetto State Bank. And the feds say he used a variety of different schemes, and they say it goes back as far as 2005, which is absolutely astonishing because he wasn't even caught until 2021. That is astonishing that it would have gone on for that long. Now, speaking of schemes, our scheme is just to give you interesting content on legal cases. So if you like that, hit the like button for the video and subscribe to the channel. We are trying to get to 100,000 subscribers, and we are so close. Thank you to everybody who has already subscribed. Now, who else was involved and is accused in this indictment, even tangentially? Definitely Russell Laffitte. He was the CEO of Palmetto State Bank and was convicted at a jury trial of 6 different counts related to these exact things that are talked about in the Alec Murdaugh indictment. He has not been sentenced yet. We're still waiting for that. His conviction was all the way back in November, so it's been a long wait for the sentencing. Also indicted related to these incidents is Corey Fleming. Corey Fleming was a fellow lawyer, Alec's college roommate, and a good friend who pled guilty to 1 count to commit wire fraud. That would be possibly up to 5 years in prison and payment of $250,000. Now, why do they keep prosecuting Murdaugh, you might be wondering, if he's already got life in prison? Like, why bother? Isn't it a lot of trouble and a lot of money to do all of this? Well, the answer is partly that there are other people involved and other people are being charged, but also it's a backup to the state charges on the very off chance that those get reversed or somehow go away. And then the third thing is sort of a matter of fairness, because if in fact he did these things, then a conviction would be fair and it would be appropriate to do that, particularly if other people are going to be convicted on these exact same charges or similar charges from the same scheme. So let's take a look at the indictment. And I've highlighted a bunch of parts for you. I'm going to be balancing my papers, what we're doing here as we talk. So let's go through it. Okay, so there are 22 different charges here. All right. And as you can see, Russell Laffitte is specifically named right there in the indictment. He was, by the time he was arrested, the chief executive officer of Palmetto State Bank. Before that, he had been an executive vice president and the chief operating officer and was promoted. And the indictment just goes ahead and calls it that they had a very close professional relationship, that Lafitte personally handled nearly all of Richard Alexander Murdaugh's, Alec Murdaugh's banking needs. It also says that the law firm asked Lafitte to serve as personal representative and conservator for clients. Now, what that means is there were clients who were either underage or incapable of handling their affairs. They were deemed incompetent under the law for whatever reason. And so they needed someone to represent them if it was an estate. And maybe you need a person who can sign documents, or a conservator who would be in charge of the funds for an individual who couldn't do that for themselves. And that's what that's what he was charged with doing. Under the law, he was a fiduciary, and he was supposed to have the absolute highest regard for their needs, and was given this specifically because he was a banker and well regarded in the community. So he had a very high responsibility to take care of the funds for all of these people. And they named them by initials. We know who some of these people are, not all of them, but they named them by initials because at the time they were represented, they were underage or otherwise incapacitated. We do know that HP is Hannah Plyler, because she's come forward and talked about that and has been heavily involved in the media with talking about what happened to her. So most of the indictment points out that most of the people who were involved with Lafitte and Murdaugh were Murdaugh's own clients. Not all of them. Sometimes it would be other law firm clients, but mostly that's the people who were involved. And also points out that Russell Lafitte collected $350,000 in fees for having represented these people as their conservator or as a representative of the estate. So that was an extremely important, want to see it? Yeah, I think you can still see it. I'll do it that way. So that was extremely important because he was actually getting paid, and according to the indictment was busy stealing funds or helping Murdaugh steal funds at the same time he's getting paid for doing this. So the scheme to defraud through Palmetto State Bank is laid out, and I've tried to cut down so we can just go straight to the most important parts. And so, like I said, I got to my documents and also here because I had to write my notes out here. I'm sure I'll come up with a better way to do this over time. So the indictment talks about the fact that Murdaugh directed law firm employees to make settlement checks straight payable to Palmetto State Bank. So, which would not necessarily be a red flag to them because the bank might be holding the funds, and in this case supposedly was, because you had the conservator Russell Lafitte. But in this case, the checks were delivered to Lafitte, and then the indictment says that Murdaugh told Lafitte to use those funds for Murdaugh's personal benefit. And the indictment goes through very specifically what exactly it is they did. They start with Hannah Plyler and her sister, AP, and talk about the fact that Lafitte was paid $140,000 in fees from AP and $113,000 from HP. So paid very handsomely to take care of their funds and to make sure that there was going to be, those funds would still be there when they turned 18, that the funds would not be dissipated or used up by someone, that they would be available when the girls turned 18 because they had lost their parents. There would be money there for them. That was the point of what Russell Lafitte was supposed to do. And so according to the indictment, what happened was pretty different from that, because what Russell Lafitte did was he gave, first of all, 10 loans to himself from their accounts, 10 loans to himself. Now, you might argue, well, maybe he was the best possible risk that they could find. He thought, well, gee, I don't know, I can invest in Microsoft or Amazon or just make loans to me and pay them back. But it wasn't clear whether he paid interest at all, and he never notified either the law firm or Hannah Plyler, anyone, that he was doing this. He never got approval from the probate court. He just made money, made loans to himself. And that was exactly what he was prosecuted for and convicted for, is those sorts of things. When Hannah Plyler turned 18, suddenly there was a crisis, because now Hannah was entitled to take all of those documents back, or all of that money back. She was entitled to take all of that back and to control it herself, because she was now old enough to be deemed under the law capable of doing that. All of a sudden, Alec Murdaugh and Russell Laffitte had to return that money. They had to pay Hannah Plyler back, because now she was going to say, I'm ready for my money, hand it over. So Russell Laffitte credited his fees and then got a loan from a third party to pay her back, thus indicating that he really didn't have the funds to pay her back. He had to go get a loan from someone else to pay her back. Therefore, probably not the best possible credit risk. Furthermore, Russell Laffitte gave 16 unsecured loans to Alec Murdaugh, totaling nearly $1 million, $963,500, that came from Hannah Plyler's conservatorship account. That is astonishing on several grounds. First of all, note that it's unsecured. So secured would be when you have a house. For example, you get a house loan, you go in and the bank says, okay, here's your loan, and we have an interest in your house. So if you don't pay us back, we can always sell your house, get our money back, and then you can get whatever is left over, but we don't lose. These were unsecured. There was nothing securing them. And furthermore, it's pretty clear that Alec Murdaugh was not a really good risk, not only not the best risk, but really, really not even a good risk. For example, the reason he transferred the loan funds was to cover an overdraft in Alec Murdaugh's personal checking account. Well, that's astonishing, because it means Murdaugh had already overdrawn his account. He didn't have enough funds in it. And now their money that's supposed to be conserved and protected by them, by Russell Laffitte, is given straight to Alec Murdaugh and into his personal checking account. Now, Alec Murdaugh has no right to these funds. The fact that he represented them as their attorney and collected the funds is already over. He's been paid his attorney's fee. This is the money that was collected and was supposed to be for the Plyler girls. It was not supposed to be given to the attorney. That's already paid out. So that's why this had to be a loan. He wasn't entitled to collect that money. It never belonged to him. Now, the amount of, well, one thing I want you to notice right here is when this all started, because according to the document filed by the feds, this started in 2011. That's when they first took loans from the Plyler money. That's amazing too. I didn't really see in the indictment how they counted back to 2005, but I could clearly see how they counted back to 2011. That means in and of itself, it's 10 solid years of this. And that is astonishing, because it is, and you'll see it kind of develop as we go through it. It really became sort of almost like a Ponzi scheme, where money was taken from one client and then that had to be paid back. So money would be taken from another client to pay that back, and then money from a third client to pay that second client back, so that ultimately it could not be sustained, because there was just constant moving of pieces around. It's amazing that it lasted for 10 years without anyone knowing that. And the number of people involved grew and grew and grew over that period of time. So according to the indictment, Richard Murdaugh used funds that he stole from personal injury clients to pay back Hannah Plyler. And then he took, for example, he took checks from the estate of DB, from NT and HPY. Then, and they say Laffitte knew all of this. It wasn't like it was a mystery to Laffitte, because he was a conservator for all of those other people too. So he knew, because he handled all of that, that the money was going straight from Alec Murdaugh's loan from yet another client to pay back the first client. So he was aware of that. And that's what the indictment is saying. Then when Hannah, and I suspect, by the way, that that's one of the reasons that Alec Murdaugh did not go ahead and plead guilty today. Apparently, he's trying to work out a deal. He has been very specific that he doesn't want to do anything that would hurt Russell Laffitte. And he tried even at trial to suggest that Russell Laffitte knew nothing about this, that he was the one behind it. And so if he were to just plead guilty, there are a lot of claims in here about Russell Laffitte and about what Russell Laffitte did. And that may be one of the things that Alec Murdaugh is trying to work out. He may be trying to protect Russell Laffitte in all of this. So then what happens? When Hannah Plyler turned 18, a couple of different things had to happen. First of all, loans from other clients had been paid back in, but still there was money left outstanding. And here Hannah is about to be 18 and need her money back. So according to the indictment, the Russell Laffitte extended a $500,000 line of credit to Alec Murdaugh for purposes of farming. Now, of course, Alec Murdaugh was not a farmer. He didn't really have a need, they pointed out at the murder trial, for farming. He didn't do that. And so why would he have this line of credit? And that particular line of credit then was used in part to pay back Hannah Plyler. That was the real reason for it, the indictment says. We go on to AB and the estate of DB, where we learn that Laffitte collected $35,000 to be the representative, even though, according to the indictment, he didn't even manage any money for the estate and had very limited interaction with the beneficiaries. In other words, he got paid $35,000 for doing pretty much nothing. That's what the indictment is saying. And the law firm, according to the indictment, issued one big check straight to the bank, $1,325,000 straight to the bank to fund a structured settlement, because that's what Alec Murdaugh had explained. But Murdaugh asked Laffitte to email him a request that the law firm cut the checks differently. And that would be legitimate for Laffitte to do because he's going to be the representative for the estate. So that seemed legitimate, but it had to come from Laffitte. It couldn't come straight from Alec Murdaugh because the firm was doing what it understood to be correct, which is writing one big check that would cover the entire structured settlement. And so, according to the indictment, numerous checks were then written specifically to Alec Murdaugh or negotiated to Alec Murdaugh out of this AB and the estate of DB funds that should have belonged to this client. Instead, here's how they were dispersed. $388,000 plus was a money order to a third-party individual just to repay a private loan that Alec Murdaugh had. $482,000 plus was to repay Hannah Plyler so that when she turned 18, nobody would realize what had happened. $75,000 was a money order that went to Alec Murdaugh's dad. $7,500, a money order that went to Maggie Murdaugh. $34,000, a wire transfer that went to 4M Iron LLC. $8,200, a money order that went to, quote, another individual associated with Alec Murdaugh. $29,000 went to Honey Creek Motors. $49,500 went to Southern Crane, and $250,000, almost $251,000, went to Richard Alexander Murdaugh's personal checking accounts and some cash back. Got a little cash back on that. None of this belongs to him. The indictment is saying that all of this money came from the client's funds. All of this was supposedly, in the law firm's view, being paid straight to the client for a structured settlement. Instead, all of these ways that it was spent were related to Alec Murdaugh personally, not for the benefit of the client. And that's what Laffitte and Murdaugh are both charged with doing. So then in October of 2021, this is after, of course, Murdaugh has been fired from his law firm. The murders have happened. Russell Laffitte wrote a check for $680,000 to the law firm for his role. What he did was negotiate a deal where the law firm would pay for half of the fraud and he would pay for half, but he used Palmetto State Bank funds to do that. And he didn't ask or consult with the Palmetto State Bank Board of Directors and the indictment talks about that specifically. So next we go to MW, another client of Richard Murdaugh's, of Alec Murdaugh's. I'm sorry, I'm getting into their language. And there was an unsecured loan. That means there's nothing to secure it or to make sure it's going to be paid back, for $40,000 straight to Alec Murdaugh from MW's conservatorship account. So it's just a loan to Alec Murdaugh. No suggestion of whether there was interest or whether any interest was paid, but he was not the risk, and that's not how conservatorship accounts really are supposed to be done. They're supposed to be very conservatively invested. And then, but Alec Murdaugh then had to pay that money back. So he used, according to the indictment, funds stolen from another client to repay MW. And you can see where this is not going to last. It requires more and more and more clients, all of whom are going to be defrauded. There's got to come some point where he gets a lot of money, and I don't know what happens, but at some point it's going to all fall apart. So then NT and HPY are the next clients. And according to the indictment, Murdaugh told his law firm to issue the settlement check again straight to Palmetto State Bank. And then here's how those were negotiated. It's the same sort of scheme. In other words, this is supposed to be client funds, and instead you're about to see all of these dollars spent specifically for Alec Murdaugh personally. $10,000 to Maggie, $9,500 to a money order. Who knows where that goes? $920 principal payment for Alec Murdaugh's boat. Now that's the infamous boat that Paul Murdaugh wrecked and that started the chain of events. That was where a young girl was killed in the boat wreck. Paul Murdaugh was charged with that, and Alec Murdaugh and all of the troubles sort of began from that stage. $3,137 was for interest, also for that infamous boat. $100,000 money order to, interestingly, Russell Lafitte's father to pay off a personal loan made to Alec Murdaugh. And we did hear at trial that Russell Lafitte's father was a big fan of Alec Murdaugh and defended him shortly when first there was discussion by the bank's board with, like, why are we loaning all this money to Alec Murdaugh? What's up with that? Anyway, around that time, Russell Lafitte's father came in and said, oh, Alec Murdaugh is somebody we've done business with for years. His law firm, we've done business with them and absolutely good for it. We can trust them. So we know that that was true. And I guess Russell Lafitte's father had reason to believe that because he had actually been paid back his $100,000 loan. Then there was $50,000 plus in a money order that was paid to Hannah Plyler's conservatorship account to repay the loans that Alec Murdaugh had pulled out of that. That was repeated with a $91,000 money order that also went to Hannah Plyler's conservatorship account, again, to repay loans. So the money is being shifted, taken from this client and now given to the Plylers, and then money is going to be taken from here. And so they will keep moving the shell. $329,500 was a money order to Alec Murdaugh's father, and $40,000 was a money order to MW to repay the loans that Alec Murdaugh had taken from MW's money. So you can see it just kind of keeps going. Then NT received additional settlement funds totaling $25,000. And they have already taken the big bulk of the funds, and another additional amount comes in for $25,000. So they structure that to all be below $10,000. And the reason is that anytime a transaction takes place over $10,000, a bank has reporting requirements. Well, in this case, if it's under 10,000, they can fly under that radar. So according to the indictment, then they intentionally did that to try to keep this all on the down low. 9,000, and notice where these went. You wonder, $9,000, unknown person cashed it out. $9,000 bank money order, unknown person. $7,248, so $45 money order cashed by an unknown person. That might feed into what Alec Murdaugh has said about his drug habit. Perhaps that's where those payments were being made, but there's really no history or anything to would show you who actually got the money, where actually it went. You just know, according to the government, according to their indictment, that it's coming from the funds that should have been paid to NT. So then we get specifically into the counts. And I want to talk just really briefly about what it was he was charged with. You can see count one is conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud, which sounds kind of technical. Like, what does that even mean? And there was a co-conspirator, and that was Russell Lafitte, already convicted. So look at that first paragraph, that A, and I guess it's the first paragraph under 14. I'll raise it to the top. And I'm going to kind of just talk through that so you can kind of understand what it is he's charged with. First of all, it has to be knowingly. It can't just be an accident. He has to have known what he was doing. There has to have been a scheme and artifice. That's kind of a fancy, very specific legal term that just means more or less like a plan. They have to have actually had this idea of where they were headed with this. There was a plan. And the plan has to be to defraud and to obtain money and property by means of false and fraudulent pretenses. In other words, it's not just a plan to do good, a plan to do something positive. It's a plan to cheat somebody. It's a plan to get money and property by using false pretenses. In other words, you're going to do something to get it from somebody and trick them, more or less. And then it can be by fraudulent pretenses, representations, and promises. So you might tell somebody, I'm going to give you this, and you don't have any intent to do that. It's all part of your plan, that kind of thing. And it has to be in interstate commerce. That's where the word wire comes from. So the idea is it's not just something between people sitting in a room somewhere in one single state and talking it over. This is something where they're using the phones, they're using the mail, they're using email, or they're across state lines. In this case, there's sort of a particular interest for the government because it affected a financial institution. And you can see where that would make sense, because if a financial institution gets gypped or ripped off, then what happens is everybody gets affected. It's not just something that affects the people the one single person, but it could potentially affect all of the people who are depositors at the bank, or all of the people who have loans from the bank. It could have consequences that go far beyond just the bank there. And I really wanted to point out to you the dates on this, because they talk about the overt acts going back all the way to 2011, when there was specifically those first two checks that were taken from the funds of, well, not the first two, but checks taken from HPY and NT for $309,000 and for $325,000. So that's going way back. In 2012, there was another $25,000 check from NT, or $25,000 amount. And then in 2013, and they go on, the dates keep going, but this had been going on a very long time. This was not something where Alec Murdaugh just suddenly fell into trouble right before this happened. And that makes it more suspicious that all of this was tied to drug use, unless the drug use had been going on for a very, very long time. If it had been going on for a minimum of 10 years at a very high pace, which no one noted, no one around him had any idea that he had this problem, as he said, with drugs, with opiates. But the fraud went all the way back to 2011. So the question then is, where did it come from? So then count two is bank fraud, and that's getting money that was being held by Palmetto State Bank and getting that fraudulently. That's related to the estate of DB. And I'm going to give you a graphic that shows you all this kind of put together. And count three was wire fraud, 2014, and it was $50,000 from the law firm belonging to DB. And this is interesting because it doesn't appear to be the fake Forge account. It's just straight up $50,000 from the law firm that was put into Murdaugh's revolving Bank of America credit account. I wondered, how did he get it? How did he persuade them of this. But there wasn't any real explanation for that. So there you have it. And the next charge is pretty much the same. Count 4, wire fraud, May 12th, 2014, which was, I believe, the same date. And it's $101,000. Again, from the law firm, belonged to the estate of DB, but it went straight into Alec Murdaugh's Bank of America revolving credit account, which is not the same, as I understand it, as a fake forge. But we'll get into the fake forge. That's still to come. Don't worry. Counts 5 through 7 were wire fraud. And here we go. The grand jury said it went to at least September 2005. We don't really know exactly what the actions were that went back that far. But according to the indictment, law firms employees were asked to draft, and this is all the fake forge account. And there were two different things. First of all, one of the things and we'll list like a whole bunch of these, they were asked to draft to send settlement funds to Bank of America accounts that Murdaugh owned. Okay, that would be the ones that were just straight up written, but it would also include the fake forge accounts because he owned and controlled those under the name of Forge, even though they were his accounts. You may remember that Forge Consulting does structured settlements for clients. So Alec Murdaugh opened an account, we'll get into detail on that here, but he opened an account under the name Forge, not Forge Settlements or Forge Structures, nothing, just the word Forge. And he convinced his law firm that they had to write the checks instead of to Forge Consulting to just Forge. And they thought they were buying structured settlements for clients, and instead they were handing a check to Alec Murdaugh. He endorsed the back and just deposited it into an account that he personally owned and controlled. And we are going to find out a really interesting fact about that. I was surprised. So maybe you all knew it, but I was very surprised to learn about this. So he also did something. He claimed funds in the law firm's trust account to satisfy liens. And you maybe, what are they talking about? So when you settle a case for a client, sometimes there are expenses that are still out there. And this goes to number D too. Sometimes there are expenses where you haven't gotten it in yet, but you just always, after you settle the case, a few last things come trickling in. There'll be a medical bill that needs to be paid. You didn't realize that, or there will be an expert hadn't finished billing, court reporter, just something will come in. So usually you set a small amount aside to cover that when it comes in. If nothing comes in, the client gets that full amount. If something comes in, you subtract that expense, and then you send at the end of 6 months or however long you said it would be, you send the rest of that to the client. So according to this, what he was doing was he was telling the firm that something needed to be set aside for a lien, and then he was just taking that money for himself as if it should have been an attorney's fee. It wasn't. It was just an amount being held back so that the client could pay whatever last expenses came in. There was also an indictment charge that he was creating fraudulent expenses that were never incurred. They named 3 things: medical expenses, construction expenses, and airline expenses. I could understand the airline expenses. That would be maybe, for example, maybe Alec Murdaugh took a trip somewhere and billed that to the client, and it wasn't even really a client expense. But I could not figure out exactly how how did he collect on a medical expense? I couldn't figure that out. And I particularly couldn't figure out how there was a fraudulent construction expense, unless maybe they were handicap proofing a house, if they were trying to make it handicap accessible. And if so, wow, can you imagine? I mean, creating fake expenses to make a house accessible and then just taking them for yourself and not even making the house accessible. But I really couldn't figure out exactly what construction expenses meant in this context. It didn't seem like something that would ever be taken from the client's account. And there was the suggestion that he directed other attorneys to disperse fees directly to him. We know for a fact that there was testimony about that at the trial, that was something Chris Wilson said. He was told, give me the money instead of the firm, And Chris Wilson ended up having to reimburse it himself because he had made the mistake of believing his his friend, Alec Murdaugh. There were a bunch of other, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what, I'm just going to go ahead and put this up. That's pretty small. Let's see. Oh, tell you what, I'm going to wait and show you that on the shared screen so you can see the whole thing. But there were 3 other charges that were just brand new, another 3 charges, all in very high amounts, about 100,000 up to 225,000. We then went into the forge scheme that I just described to you and how exactly he was taking that money. But here's an interesting fact that I didn't know anyway. There in fact were 2 fake forge accounts, not just one. The first fake forge account was open, and let's go back to that because that's really interesting too. The first fake forge account was opened in 2015, but it wasn't used until May 2017. There would be no reason for Alec Murdaugh to have an account called Forge that I can think of except for this scheme. Why would he have one? It wasn't his name. He had no business in that name, and he used it for fraud against clients by pretending to be Forge Consulting. So all the way back in 2015, he planned to do this. And I guess he didn't have the right occasion until May of 2017. So he waited almost 2 years to be able to use this. He planned it, according to the indictment, 2 full years before he actually executed it. And then something went wrong, and the fake forge account was force closed in July of 2018 because it had been overdrawn. But not deterred, Murdaugh opened a second fake forge account. I had no idea that. That's truly amazing that that happened. Oh, there we go. So the indictment then goes into the Satterfield issue. And we all remember Tony Satterfield, who testified at trial. And Tony Satterfield was the son of Gloria Satterfield. I did a whole video on this a couple of days back. And Gloria Satterfield was the housekeeper and nanny for the Murdaughs for many years. And she died falling down the steps, at least supposedly, at Moselle. And when she died, Alec Murdaugh at the funeral spoke to Tony Satterfield and said, I feel badly about this. I want you to sue me. I've got homeowners insurance. I'll make sure you boys get taken care of. So I'm going to let you sue me. And then said to Tony Satterfield, I want you to hire my friend. This friend will represent you because obviously I can't be the defendant and represent you. I can't represent someone against myself. So I want you to let Corey Fleming, my good friend, represent you. Now, Corey Fleming has also pled guilty to 1 count related to the Gloria Satterfield issues and the Gloria Satterfield estate issues. So Alec Murdaugh was looking to collect from his homeowner's insurance. That's what the whole issue was about. We now know that Alec Murdaugh just 2 weeks ago suddenly announced that the whole case was fraudulent. Gloria Satterfield didn't even necessarily trip over the dogs at Moselle and fall down the steps. I guess he figures he doesn't know how she got hurt. And he says now he made up the whole story about her waking up, telling him she tripped over the dogs and that's how she got hurt. And that was the grounds, the basis for collecting from the homeowner's insurance. He's now saying, okay, that never happened. So all of this is sort of an overlay. The charge here is you stole the money from the Satterfields. And the details on this are amazing because first, and this is almost small compared to everything else in terms of dollars, but they say that $11,500 in expenses were charged for no reason. There weren't even these prosecution expenses, and by which I think they just mean case expenses, because an attorney usually will pay those expenses out along during the case, and then at the end of the case, recoup those, get those back. But in this case, they just made up expenses according to what the indictment says. There were also checks made out to the fake forge account. This would be fake forge account number 2. $403,500. And then and I want you to notice the date on this, January 7th, 2019 is when Murdaugh first deposited funds to the fake forge account for this case. There was a homeowner's policy and an umbrella policy, so there were two separate settlements. The second settlement came through on April 18th, 2019, and the umbrella insurance carrier paid $3,800,000, and more again was deposited to the fake forge account. The reason that date is so important, remember that Tony Satterfield testified that when the murders occurred in June 2021, we're talking substantially after this, that 2 years almost after this, he was still being told by Alec Murdaugh that they had not yet settled his case, that they were still working on the case, and that Alec Murdaugh was hoping maybe they could get $100,000 per boy. So $200,000. And according to this indictment, 2 years earlier, Alec Murdaugh knew for a fact more than $4 million had been collected on behalf of the boys and the estate, and is still saying nothing has happened. Those darn insurance companies, they take forever. Courts, they're so slow. And it was untrue, according to this indictment. So there were some more fake expenses they talked about, but here's the bottom line. All of that time, the estate of Gloria Satterfield never received a penny. That's truly astonishing. 2 years, and they never got one dime, nothing, not a penny. Now, of course, the attorneys representing them have collected $7 million, more than the $4 million from various parties, but that's related to malpractice and other issues like that. From this money that originally came from the insurance companies, they got nothing. The overt acts, and this sort of summarizes it for you, January 7th, 2019, $403,500. May 13th, almost $3 million went straight to the forge. And then, just as a kicker, another $118,000 in 2020, again, went to forge. All of those happened long before Tony Satterfield was told in June of 2021, as he testified, that nothing had been collected. I have to say, it looks really, really bad. All right, sorry, I'm getting little parts. I'm going to switch over to share screen with a different document, because I want to show you that chart, and I want it to be a little bit bigger so that you can see what I'm talking about. I'm hoping I can do that. Oh, yep, I think I can. I can only share one screen at a time, so that's why it's taking just a minute. No, that's not it. Well, we'll just go, tell you what, we'll just put this in the stream and go as big as we can. These, according to the indictment, this is all of the funds that Alec Murdaugh took from clients. These are all of the different pieces that went together to create this scheme. And this particular, I mean, it goes on for 2 solid pages, and they're not small numbers. Some of them are, granted, but many of them are very big, and they go back a long way in time. It's astonishing. I mean, it's really amazing that it happened for so long and that there was so little oversight of this. It's amazing. I remain just completely befuddled about how that happened. So these particular, all the ones you see I have highlighted in yellow on this, these are yet more. They're not even covered in all the stuff we have. These are the ones that aren't highlighted in yellow were mentioned elsewhere in the indictment, but here are more, all going into the forge account. Look at all those going into the forge account. And all of that money, according to the government, and they want it all back. They want it all forfeited. And it's not back. I guess technically a lot of it never belonged to them, but they want it all forfeited as illegal proceeds. And the government says it's $7.6 million. absolutely crazy, absolutely unbelievable that all of that went on and on and on and on. So, okay, the question is, what happened today then? And what is going to happen next? Now, well, let's get first what happened today. Alec Murdaugh was arraigned. That means they read the charges and he had the chance to say how he pled. Beforehand, we had a statement from Jim Griffin and Dick Harpootlian, the attorneys representing Alec Murdaugh. And here's what they said. Alec has been cooperating with the United States Attorney's Office and federal agencies in their investigation of a broad range of activities. We anticipate that the charges brought today will be quickly resolved without a trial. Well, that suggested to everybody, well, he's going to plead guilty. There's going to be some kind of deal cut on this. And there would be every reason to do that because he's already been sentenced to life in prison for having murdered his wife and son. So what's the point, really, of going through a big trial? But instead, Alec Murdaugh came and pled guilty. Again, Jim Griffin said that might change soon, that there could be a change very shortly in which they announce a deal with the government. And I want you to notice, too, the difference between what happened here and what happened with the Brian Kohberger case out of Idaho. You may have read about Brian Kohberger, and we talked a little bit on the channel about the fact that Brian Kohberger did something called standing silent. So when he was, the charges were read to him, instead of saying guilty or not guilty, he said nothing at all. And under the law, then that was deemed to be a plea of not guilty. But he never had to actually say, I'm pleading not guilty. He just stood there, and it was then assumed under the law. That was unusual. It may be very common in Idaho or perhaps with Kohberger's specific attorney. But what you see happened here is probably a little more common because Jim Griffin, the client, Alec Murdaugh, came in and pled guilty, and Jim Griffin said that may change. We might need a change of plea hearing. And then at that point, Alec Murdaugh will go from pleading guilty, is not guilty, to pleading guilty. That could happen if we reach this agreement. So is this going to affect the murder charges? The answer is it's not going to prevent him. Like, let's say he does admit that he did this. Let's say he makes a deal with the government. Is that going to affect the murder convictions? It shouldn't. He can plead guilty to financial crimes and still fight the murder charges because they are different. It's a different court. It's entirely different charges. It might affect potentially what evidence came in if he got retried, but not whether he can appeal. I don't think it would have any impact on him. What will come next is that there will be more discussions. Obviously, they're ongoing now between Alec Murdaugh's team and the prosecution on the federal side, not the state side, the federal side. It would make sense probably for him to settle this case because, among other reasons, he doesn't have any money left to really defend against it. He had $600,000 that was given to him to spend on attorneys from his 401k, but according to filings from his attorneys, that was all gone. With the first trial all gone, and the judge would not even allow more for his first appeal, which frankly did surprise me. Often, if there are multiple appeals, then the courts are very reluctant to give money for those. But for a first appeal, those are usually treated a little differently. So I was kind of surprised that the judge didn't allow him additional funds for his first appeal. There were controversial decisions in the case that might be grounds on appeal. I've already been through why I don't think it's very likely that he's going to be able to get it reversed on appeal. I've already been through that, but I do think he has a legitimate grounds for appeal. It's not like it's false or frivolous. So another reason he might want to do this is he would clearly rather have federal prison than state prison. Almost always that's the case. There's been speculation that maybe he's trying to strike a quick deal on the federal side, hoping to somehow work out a deal where he would get federal prison. I don't really see that happening since he's already been convicted on the state side, but there may be some background stuff going on that I don't know about and that would get him transferred. There was an interview with someone who Jumpsuit Pablo, who's been on our channel before. And the interview was with somebody who had shared a cell with Alec Murdaugh and said Alec Murdaugh wanted to be moved to Florida, to a prison in Florida. There weren't a lot of details around what that would look like or how it would happen. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see. So those are the federal charges that we now have against Alec Murdaugh, 22 of them, and some really hot, sizzling evidence about stealing from his clients and about what exactly he did that took money from his clients and that kept that money in all sorts of different ways and all sorts of different schemes that allowed that money to be funneled straight to him instead of going to his clients. And for how really, really long it had gone on. It had been a very long time, since at least 2011, and the grand jury said since 2005. Amazing. So we are going to be live again on Friday at 7 o'clock. If you haven't already subscribed, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Like the video too. That'll help get it out to more people. And I will look forward on Friday at 7 o'clock.